But welcome all. Welcome to this political economy course named The State and the Economy, a particular course that I enjoy a lot because I have the opportunity of talking with you about basically how the different interactions between economic agents and political agents affects markets, affects government policies or public policies in general, and also affects the communities and the citizens that live with them. So, um, the world in which we live in. The first big chunk of the entire course is understanding what are the main problems that our planet faces. When we talk about the world, we need to understand that the planet and the global economy has grown a lot over the last, let's call it 200 years, a little bit less than 200 years. As you see in the graph, since the second industrial revolution in the mid 19th century, the world's GDP, which is the gross domestic product or the amount of wealth that the planet has increased dramatically. And over many periods of humanity, things were very similar. And from one generation to the other, they would continue doing the same things. They would basically be farmers, or they would be swordsmiths, or they would be clergy, or whatever they were, and they would just continue doing what they would be doing. And since the basically the latter part of the Middle Ages, and especially with the Renaissance, and the spice route trades with India and with Southeast Asia, connecting through a Suez Canal before the Suez Canal existed, but basically through Turkey, the Middle East, a little bit of Ethiopia in Africa, and obviously Europe. The world GDP started to increase because there, with those transactions, with that trade, people were able to sell different stuff. Some merchants and some people that could rent boats and stuff like that became insanely rich as they brought spices and silk and stuff like that from Asia towards Europe. And then there were a bunch of wars, and like the Catholic Church broke into two with the Martin Luther and the Reformation of the, I think it was 17th century, and stuff like that started happening. But then with the Industrial Revolution, it's when basically everything skyrocketed. And since around 1840, 1850, the amount of wealth that the planet has been able to create with more or less the same number of resources available, natural resources, and even as we use them with even less natural resources through the use, or basically through the increase in productivity, the planet has been able to increase in wealth and grow in economic terms. In this regard, and coinciding with a little bit of this huge increase since the mid 19th century, you have capitalism, which is a little bit older than that as a form of like social organization. But capitalism is by far the best system to generate wealth. There is no better economic system at creating wealth. The main problem is that what type of wealth? What type of wealth are we creating with or through capitalism? And as you will see in your screens, maybe it's that type of wealth, or maybe it's this type of wealth, or that type of wealth, or even that type of wealth. And as you can see from these four people, it is this part of the course that I like to focus much more on. So why the most powerful people become very rich, or why do the very rich people become very powerful? And those intricacies are key to understanding how the world is being run and what are its main problems. I really like this graph. This is a map of the world at night, basically. And the lighter parts of the map are basically lights, like public lighting, and in general how cities shine at night. If you would take a picture from outer space or from very high in the stratosphere. So as you can see, obviously, as one of you pinpointed, Where there's more population and where there's more urban areas, you have more lights and you have brighter lights. But you also have a lot of dark places in the map. Obviously, the darkest places are the ocean, but beyond that, it is surprising how big is the area, like in terms of square kilometers, that are very dark at night and that show the other thing that one of you was mentioning, the lack of development that you find in many of these areas. And obviously you find them in very remote areas like the Andes or certain like mountain ranges, obviously. But if you see the entire African continent, you see just a couple of illuminated parts in the northern part of the continent, near Morocco and like Libya and stuff like that, and also another one in like South Africa. But the vast majority of the continent is really dark at night, which probably means that they lack a lot of infrastructure. But there's one thing that I want to show, and I'm gonna like reach out and draw so that you can see it. I would normally pinpoint this in the classroom, but what do we have here? The Korean Peninsula, yes. And what is the most interesting stuff about that? The difference between the very illuminated South Korea and the very, very dark North Korea. A place that up until 70 years ago was still one country. And that basically a little bit less than 70 years ago, like 67 years ago, after the war ended, still the southern part of Korea was one of the poorest countries in the planet. And right now, not only are they one of the best countries at handling COVID-19, but they're also, let's call it one of the top 20 developed countries in the planet, probably, and maybe even higher than that, in different characteristics, in different traits, in different variables. So why, and the question here is that I want to address with this particular map, is why does this happen? Why are we having this huge inequality? This basically insulting difference between the richest people in the planet and the poorest people. And these minuscule elites, in terms of the number of people with regards to the entire global population, and this masses of society that have so little. This graph from the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report from last year shows basically that huge divide, the great divide between how less than 1% of all the adults that live in this planet hold or control around 45% of the world's wealth. And then on the other side of the spectrum, on the right-hand side of that graph, you have basically the opposite, in which almost 60% of the entire population that basically earns under $10,000 a year controls combined less than 2% of the entire global wealth. The third and fourth groups from right to left, well, they have a lot more wealth and they can do a lot more stuff with that. And a little bit of this course is understanding what those people do with their wealth, and not necessarily just poking at like what billionaires like Kanye West and like Kim Kardashian do with their money, like that type of show, but much more like into like what happens when these billionaires have all that power, what happens when all these people have all that power. And that's a little bit where we're trying to focus. And to answer this type of question, we need to basically understand what is the correct things to question. What are the things that we need to understand in order to find some answers? And as you can see, we are a world of huge contrasts. First of all, you have on one side of the spectrum, Qatar. And Qatar had the highest GDP per capita. And GDP per capita, if you don't remember your macroeconomics classes, GDP per capita is basically the amount of wealth in the economy that every person in that economy holds. And at the opposite side of the spectrum, we have Burundi. And in Burundi, people earn per year, in average, only $724. And this is dramatic. It's like completely unthinkable, unfathomable how different they are. So, how can we explain these huge differences? Resources are certainly one of the reasons why there are differences between these countries, but not the only difference. As you can see here, we have two pictures. One from Beijing in 1980, and one from I don't remember what was the city I took the picture. No, I did not took that picture. I found it in Google from India. But the point I want to make is that 40 years ago, China's GDP per capita was a little bit more than half of what India's was. Both countries with a lot of population, and the more population you have, the smaller your GDP per capita becomes. It's a simple division. But 40 years later, or in 2019, these are 2019 data, China's GDP per capita is a lot bigger than what it was before. It passed from being 200 and what 53 to being 20,000, almost $21,000 per person. And India's also grew a lot. But now China's is more than double India. And we're talking about two countries that have grown a lot over that period. China obviously being the country that has grown the most in that period of time, from like by far from any other country. But we're not comparing it with a country that did not grow that much. India has also grown a lot over that period of time. Maybe India suffered that its population also increased a lot during that period of time. But still, it's dramatic that India was like basically like twice, almost twice as rich as was China 40 years ago, and now China is more than double what India is, and that is really symptomatic. You can change the fate of your nation in 2 generations, and that is really important. But at the same time, it's really important to understand that it goes beyond just the resources. You were mentioning a lot of nuances and a lot of things that can affect this development. So we should not just fall normally in the idea that, oh, if a country has more resources, or if a country lacks resources because of something happened like colonialism, then we are doomed to be like that all the time. And that is why one of you answered or responded in the previous question about institutions. That's why institutions are so important, because they can change how a country develops based on how you handle people. And that's really important, because those institutions, those government decisions do affect the outcome of these countries, and ultimately they affect the fate of the people living there. And that is key to understand. And that is why government officials have so huge responsibilities, because when they take erroneous policies, those decisions will not affect only their workers or the people in their family or something like that. No, they affect huge chunks of society that sometimes, and they just have to suffer those bad decisions. And resources that we were discussing are important. But the thing that I think is more important is how you allocate those resources. Well-defined property rights is really important into basically allocating appropriately and efficiently these resources, but it is not everything. Two examples: Oaxaca and Guanajuato. Oaxaca and Guanajuato are not that far away, actually, when you drive. It's within the same country. We speak the same language. Many people have moved from Oaxaca to Guanajuato, and many people have moved within Mexico to other places. And what is the difference between the resource-rich Oaxaca and the maybe not as resource-rich Guanajuato? It did have a lot of mines, that is important. But the success, or the recent success of Guanajuato, is not based on mining, as it was in the 1600s or in the 1500s when the Spanish were here. It's how they allocated specific resources and what type of activities, what type of industries, what type of sectors you push and you further, what type of policies you implement that allow your state, your city, your country to grow faster. But the difference is that their backgrounds and basically their environment, the place where they will be living, can hugely and dramatically affect their final outcome. And this is really important because you need to push for policies that will help bring people closer from one point of the spectrum to the other. You need to elevate the people that are left behind such that you are not leaving them behind. And allocating those resources efficiently is key to this. This is an economic problem. And economics as a science studies basically the way those resources, which are scarce, are allocated. And it has a duality in which economics studies present tense type decisions at the same time that it studies future tense type decisions. And it affects the way we distribute those resources, what may happen in the future. But these problems that we are facing in the world are more than just an economic problem. They are a problem of power. Power is an important and a very relevant variable to understand that normally the neoclassical theory models of economics don't address. And who has the power to change the rules and the laws in a particular place? That is a key variable to understanding why certain countries do better than others. Who are the powerful? What do they use their power for? And this, more than an economic problem, this is a struggle between two very powerful forces, the economic forces and the political forces. And how they interact can create a very inclusive towards development and growth type path, or they could create crony capitalism, as Don Silvio Berlusconi is laughing about right now.